Okay, it's 7:05. We're going to go ahead and get started now. I'm sure several people will trickle in as we go along here. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hi to everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Saya Clark. I'm the co-chair of DSA North Texas. I've been in DSA for almost 2 years now. And I mostly do work with anti-war, so Palestine solidarity work, and queer feminist working group. And we've got some really incredible people who organized this call tonight, as well as speakers. So I'm just going to go through some basic ground rules here to get us started. So yes, introduce yourself in the chat with name and chapter, like everybody's doing. Please keep yourself muted during the call. I don't think that's necessary. I think everybody will be muted automatically. Frequent disruptors will be just removed. And we are going to have a really great Q&A session towards the end of the call here. So you should see on your Zoom panel there a box where you can enter questions, and then we will bring those to the panelists towards the end of the call. Okay, so for the agenda tonight, we've got like three main sections here. We're going to do just a very brief overview of the DSA's International Committee Palestine Subcommittee. We're going to talk about BDS history and a call to action. And we are going to spotlight some grassroots campaigns that have been successful in Portland and Alameda. So for the first thing here, all right, so this is the DSA International Committee Palestine Subcommittee. DSA's International Committee stands in unwavering solidarity with Palestinian people in their now 77-year struggle for liberation from Israel's settler colonial occupation, ethnic cleansing, and ongoing genocide. Gaza is now under a complete siege, depriving more than 2 million people, half of whom are children, of food, water, medicine, and electricity, while under continuous and barbaric bombing. We call for the immediate de-escalation and end to U.S. military aid to Israel and justice for the Palestinian people. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So over here in this subcommittee, there's no question where our support is at. And we've seen things heat up even more, I think, since this statement was read. And I'm sure everybody is very familiar with that. Okay, so some of the key focuses and areas, activities that our subcommittee works on is boycott and divestment campaigns. We do political education like we're doing right now, and obviously a lot of local organizing from chapter to chapter. We practice and act on international solidarity and a protective presence in Palestine. We advocate for, obviously, a total arms embargo, a ceasefire, and when we can, like on the call tonight, policy changes. And our guiding principles here in the subcommittee are Palestinian liberation, anti-imperialism, and internationalism, and coalition building. So these are a few of the campaigns, BDS-focused campaigns that the International Committee has launched and been working on throughout the country. My chapter specifically is engaged in a Stop Fueling Genocide campaign now because I live in Texas, where Chevron has a very large presence and a lot of franchisees. There is the Mask Off MERS campaign, which is led by the Palestinian Youth Movement, and they've already done a lot of incredible work on this. And so in this subcommittee, we are working to not only shore up that effort, but push for that BDS campaign on our own as well. And then the famous No Money for Massacres campaign, which is one of the better known BDS campaigns in DSA. And then I just want to wrap up this intro section here by saying thank you for joining us tonight. And if you are a DSA member, we welcome all DSA members interested in global solidarity and anti-imperialism to apply to join DSA's International Committee. And you can do that at international.dsausa.org. And now I'm going to pass it over to our next speaker, which will be Olivia. Thank you very much. Take it away, Olivia.
Thank you, Saya, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. My name is Olivia. Catby. I work as the North America coordinator for the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So I coordinate BDS campaigns in the US and Canada. And I'm also co-chair of my DSA chapter in Portland, Oregon. So I always love the opportunity to get to talk to fellow DSA members about BDS. So we are a year and a half into an unprecedented, horrific genocide being committed by Israel. And we are also on the cusp of the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, when 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed during the founding of the State of Israel. And Palestinians right now are calling on the world to escalate pressure to end state and corporate and institutional complicity in Israel's crimes, which include the genocide, obviously, but also the underlying regime of settler colonialism and apartheid. And that call has now been reiterated by the International Court of Justice and the UN General Assembly that states and corporations must comply with international law by ending their relationships with Israel as long as these crimes are being committed. And that includes cities. So since its founding in 2005, the BDS movement has been calling on municipal governments to end complicity with Israel and complicit companies. And many cities around the world have heeded that call. Even before the start of the genocide, dozens of Spanish cities declared themselves apartheid-free zones, which is a campaign led by the BDS movement for cities, businesses, cultural spaces, and other institutions to pledge not to have any sort of relationship with Israeli apartheid. Cities made decisions not to award multinational corporation Veolia contracts because of its role in the illegal Jerusalem light rail project. And that helped build the pressure for Veolia to eventually withdraw from Israel completely, because this refusal to contract with them made them lose out on nearly $20 billion in potential contracts. And cities played a big part in that. I am hearing that maybe my internet is not great. So let me know if I need to turn my camera off because I will be sharing my screen shortly anyway. After the Gaza genocide began in 2023, 35 Basque city councils adopted motions calling for sanctions, including a military embargo, relations, and the city of Barcelona ended its agreements with Israel. So that, coupled with refusals from dock workers to load ships that were carrying weapons to Israel, helped to build the pressure for Spain to ban a ship carrying weapons to Israel from docking at its ports. And that's still an ongoing thing where Spanish cities and dock workers and trade unions are pressuring the government to implement a full arms embargo. In Italy, Bologna City Council and Emilia-Romagna Regional Council voted to adopt ethical procurement policies, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. City councils in New Zealand and Belgium voted not to contract with companies that do business with illegal Israeli settlements. Ireland's largest party, Sinn Féin, announced it is working in city councils across Ireland to implement ethical procurement policies. And Derry City Council in Northern Ireland was the first to adopt that policy. And by my count, which I might be missing some, 9 US cities and counties have implemented some form of divestment since winter 2024. So I know, especially if you're based in the US, in the heart of the empire, it's easy to feel like this task of pushing our institutions to end their complicity is insurmountable, but it's not. It has been done again and again and again. And we have many examples to borrow from and learn from. So you are not in this alone. Our federal government is an active participant in this genocide. Calling your members of Congress is not working right now. It is up to us in the cities to lead the way on this, especially under the Trump administration. We have, so-called progressives in cities making attempts to stand up to Trump, and Palestine has to be a part of that. You cannot be anti-fascist without being anti-genocide. Cities are also hosts to some of the most complicit companies that the BDS movement targets, and how your city interacts with these corporations can make an impact. Some of you know that Chevron is a priority BDS target right now due to its ownership and operation of 2 gas fields and a pipeline that serve Israel. In Richmond, California, which has divested from companies that are complicit. They also went to battle with Chevron for years, and they just forced them to pay a $500 million settlement to the city. And Chevron is now in the process of relocating its headquarters to Texas from California because it has been made so unwelcome in California by both local and state officials. And that's not because of its, complicity in Israel, but it's because of its, destruction and horrific impact on people's lives in California and worldwide. So that's just an example of how city governments can be on the front lines of this struggle if there is political will to do so. So I'm going to share this toolkit. One second. Okay. So I put together this toolkit last year for the BDS movement, but I really adapted it from a toolkit I had helped put together in Portland DSA. In Portland, Oregon, by the way, we're hearing from the other Portland shortly. In Portland, Oregon, we have 4 DSA members on city council now. And it's a very exciting time for us. And we wanted to give our councilors a clear picture of what their options are in terms of ending our city's complicity in Israel's crimes. So this gives 6 different options that are kind of big buckets. And I'm going to give an overview of each of them. Is my internet still good? Am I cutting out at all? I'm good? Okay. Cutting out. Okay, I'm going to turn my camera off since you're looking at my screen anyway, if I can do that. Okay, great. So number 1 is passing a human rights investment and procurement policy, stipulating that the city will not invest in or contract with companies that are complicit in grave human rights violations. This is important for a number of reasons. First, we want to avoid the sort of whack-a-mole aspect of divestment. You find one complicit company on your city's list, you do all the work, months of work probably to get support for divestment. Your city finally divests, and then, bam, what shows up on the list next year? Another complicit company. So in order to avoid that situation where you're trying to catch every single new company on the list all the time, we recommend getting an investment policy passed that specifically prohibits investments in companies that are complicit in grave human rights violations anywhere. And there are a couple different ways to word this. We have an ethical investment policy template linked in here that builds on standard ESG guidelines to also include weapons, fossil fuels, human rights, and genocide criteria. AFSC has something similar, which includes weapons companies, military contractors, fossil fuel companies, and also a human rights screen. I also know that some major churches recently adopted a policy that they would not invest in any sovereign debt bonds that were from countries who were guilty of prolonged occupations. So obviously that includes Israel bonds. Wording this to be more general and not just about Palestine, first of all, greatly increases the likelihood that this policy will pass because you can't be accused of singling out Israel. Second of all, it gets a policy on the books that will prevent new investments in these companies, so you don't always have to constantly chase them down. And third, it helps build intersectional coalitions because we should genuinely be opposed to complicity in human rights violations anywhere, including in Palestine. And it's also potentially a way to get around anti-BDS restrictions in some cases. So rather than focusing on just Israel bonds or focusing on just Caterpillar or just Chevron, it's better to adopt a policy that prevents investments in all of those things. Okay, number 2 is divest from specific companies. So if for some reason, the timeline lines up so that you can't get an investment policy for a reason, or it's very easy to divest right away from some specific company or companies, then of course you should. And I think that's what happened in Portland, Maine. It was a long list of companies. Hayward, California, they had companies they divested from, and that was just because they had the votes right then. The timing was right. They didn't want to delay it. They're like, okay, we're going to do it. And of course, do that. If that's what makes sense in your context, then of course, divest from specific companies. Number 3 is an institutional boycott. So this can include a few different things, including ethical procurement, which can be coupled with a human rights investment policy. So your city can adopt a policy saying we're not going to contract with specific companies that are complicit in grave human rights violations. And that's different from divestment. So a contract meaning, your city might have a contract with Palantir for surveillance software, for example. A big one for us in the BDS movement was G4S. That was a global target. And we campaigned on this in Portland because our security guards at City Hall were G4S. And this was during the big Abolish ICE movement in 2018. G4S was also running the transportation of detained immigrants for ICE. So we built an intersectional coalition around that target, trying to push our city not to contract with G4S. G4S is no longer a BDS target because they pulled out of Israel completely, so we did win that campaign. Chevron is also on here as an example of an institutional boycott. So, for example, your city or your city workers union could pledge not to fill official work vehicles at Chevron until Chevron withdraws from Israel. There is some precedent to this. The International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers, which represents 100,000 app-based drivers worldwide, has pledged to boycott Chevron. Another example that I'm quite proud of here in Portland, one of our DSA electeds noticed that Chevron was a sponsor of the City Club City Council Forums, which is an event series where city councilors speak at these forums. And he and another DSA counselor said, if you don't remove Chevron as a sponsor, we're not coming. And then they removed Chevron as a sponsor. So there are other ways to cut ties with complicit companies beyond divestment. There are also ways to explore this with Maersk. So the Mask Off Maersk campaign, which was mentioned at the beginning, Danish shipping company that is helping to ship weapons to Israel from the US out of ports in US cities. So working with or pressuring city councilors to pressure the port authorities in your city to end their complicity in weapons shipments. We can push for military embargo at the city level, and I wish I had more time to talk about that point specifically. Number 4 is severing ties with Israeli sister cities. There's a program called Sister Cities, which allegedly promotes cooperation and support between cities. Many U.S. cities have sister city relationships with Israeli cities, which serves to whitewash Israel as a normal state that we should cooperate with. In other countries, these are sometimes actually like part of trade agreements between cities. So cities in other parts of the world, especially Europe, have ended these twinning agreements, is what they're called. And we can do the same here in US cities. And this can also include other refusal to cooperate with Israeli city governments, like at the city level. I know in Portland several years ago, the city hosted this Smart Cities Tech Conference, and they had city officials from Tel Aviv come to talk about cool tech they were using in their city, and we disrupted that conference. Another example, sometimes there are specific organizations set up to encourage cooperation. In Oregon, there's the Oregon-Israel Business Alliance. So this all kind of falls under the same umbrella of cutting ties with the Israeli government at the city level. Number 5 is passing a resolution calling on other elected officials to take action. So having city officials calling on their congressional delegation from their state to end military funding to Israel. Cities also sometimes have lobbying departments. I know in Portland we do, where city lobbyists will go and lobby the state government for the things that the city needs. So having your electeds directing their city lobbyists in their relationships with higher levels of government to end complicity at those levels too. One thing that's popping up right now is a push for city councilors to defend the free speech of their constituents by passing a resolution saying, they're not going to cooperate with the Trump administration's suppression of free speech, demanding the release of Mahmoud Khalil and everyone else who has been detained for exercising their rights, and demanding that universities and institutions within their city uphold these values and their students and their workers' rights to free speech and right to protest. One cool example I will share from Portland is one of our DSA counselors, Mitch Green, said he was not going to vote in favor of city funding for a new building at Portland State University unless they dropped the charges against their students who were being disciplined for pro-Palestine protests. And they dropped the charges against the students because of that. So this is especially crucial for DSA now that we are getting more power at the city level and electing DSA members to these seats, seeing them actually wield their power in this way, that can extend beyond the city into the university and into other institutions and levels of government. And that's important because as of now, no one else, to my knowledge, has been able to hold universities accountable for their pro-genocide suppression of speech that way. So I would really love to see more of that. And number 6 is apartheid-free cities. So the BDS movement has had a campaign called Apartheid-Free Zones for about a decade. This is a campaign for institutions, including cities, but also including unions, businesses, churches, faith institutions, cultural spaces, basically any organization or location to declare themselves apartheid free. And this can take a lot of different forms, and it can often be the first step to some of these other steps that we talked about, especially divestment. But essentially, declaring that your city commits to refraining from providing any kind of support for or cooperation with Israel. When this campaign first started, it really took off in Europe, with dozens of cities declaring themselves apartheid-free zones, which often resulted in cutting off trade relations or any relations with Israel. American Friends Service Committee started a version of this in North America called Apartheid Free Communities, which has a short pledge to be apartheid free. They have over 500 apartheid free communities signed on. Most recently in Vermont, 5 towns voted to become apartheid free communities. And I've been getting some questions lately about this, saying stuff like the Apartheid Free Pledge doesn't actually have BDS measures in it and it's really vague. And yes, that's the point. It's supposed to be a first step, simply laying the groundwork and saying, okay, step 1 is we don't want to be complicit in apartheid. We're all in agreement that that's what our values are. Then step 2 is, okay, we've passed this pledge. What does that mean? That means we can't have this investment when it comes up for renewal, or we can't host an Israeli government delegation, etc. It's laying the groundwork and creating space for eventual support for BDS measures. And one thing I want to note is that we don't need cities to say they support BDS. We need them to do BDS. We need them to actually boycott or divest their funds or call for sanctions or an end to the military funding. That is the important part. So if they divest from all the companies on our list, but they don't say they support BDS, that's fine. That's great. You still did the thing of cutting complicity, and that's what we needed you to do. We can do the messaging around BDS, even if they don't. And a lot of the times, there's anti-BDS laws, so, they can't. One other thing I wanted to note is that I would encourage you to find ways to incorporate city workers and organized labor when you're doing city level campaigns. Many cities have a unionized workforce, and it's really important to work with them to leverage that power and make these campaigns a lot more effective. And this is one of the things that makes DSA uniquely suited to do BDS work at the city level, because we do a lot of that work with labor organizing and have lots of active and engaged union members in our ranks. So leveraging that for BDS campaigns, as well as our DSA elected officials, which we are, gaining ground and winning more and more seats on city councils across the country, makes DSA, really uniquely suited for this kind of work. And I will stop there. I'm so sorry about my internet and if that was spotty.
That's totally fine, Olivia. Thank you so much for that incredibly thorough breakdown. That link was posted in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and post it there one more time so people can take a look at it. And there are so many options here for people who are already in a DSA chapter. A huge list of different things that you can do to start turning your cities into apartheid-free places and to divest from the Zionist entity. So now we're going to go into our first panelist here. I believe it's pronounced Salaya. Salaya, I'm so sorry. So Salaya Al-Matri is a Palestinian mother, human rights advocate, and community organizer for Palestine and native land back in Wabanaki territory, so-called Maine. She is part of a growing coalition for Palestine of over 14 organizations and hundreds of organizers who plan events and campaigns across the state for the liberation of Palestinian people, while connecting our struggle to local and international movements for justice. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. So I am going to share some slides here just to help keep me under 10 minutes here. And what I mostly want to share tonight is how we gained traction. And I'm going to keep repeating these 3 things. And here they are up here: friendly introductions, a series of documents, and the ask of how can we help support you to be brave. And just in case some of us are new to BDS, I mean, I was new to it as of about a year ago. The headlines are an important aspect of the impact of BDS. We do BDS for headlines and to achieve the, you know, avalanche effect of all municipalities, all universities, all cities, all entities, all houses of worship divesting. So not one single town can do it on its own. And that's why, you know, those headlines are imperative. Some frequently asked questions that we asked ourselves often in multiple BDS campaigns. Some of these questions we spent months on, wasted a lot of time. And those are: do we need to learn to decipher financial portfolios? We did the FOIAs and we got back these spreadsheets and we did these webinars. So that was one of the first questions that we spent a lot of time with. Do we need to prove that there are investments in complicit corporations, or have access to our municipality's portfolio to start a campaign? Do we need to escalate and risk arrest to be successful here? The answer to all of these in the 3 campaigns that were successful on Wabanaki land, so-called Maine, were no. In a series of 6 months, we were able to get 3 municipalities to divest or take a real step, you know, towards divestment. And 2 of those, one of those municipalities actually refused to even do a ceasefire resolution. And so, and then they turned around and passed the resolution to divest. So, and one thing I want to share here about our campaign strategy, and all of us organizers don't agree on things all the time, right? And so we certainly did not agree on how to approach these campaigns in the beginning. And actually, a few DSA organizers asked me to say this explicitly on this call here. The ways, you know, that the DSA in Portland, as an example, had carried out different campaigns was going to be a barrier to Portland's divesting from Israel. And actually, the sponsor of our campaign, or of our resolution, the municipal, sorry, it's late, I'm on the East Coast and I have 2 toddlers. I go to bed. Our counselor, yeah, that's the word. Our counselor who sponsored it, you know, in my first meeting with her, said, I like you. I like this draft resolution. DSA has conducted itself in a way that if they are the like leaders of this is going to go nowhere in Portland. And so DSA organizers were key in every stage of this campaign. And they also asked me to say this tonight, that sometimes banding together with a coalition can be an effective strategy. And I do it all the time. You know, the Coalition for Palestine is an organization that, you know, everyone knows what we stand for. It feels strategic at times, just like the apartheid free zone approach, right? To meet people where they're at, if you know there is potential for movement and growth. So we can spend 5 years rallying and protesting and blocking streets, or we could spend 4 months doing a campaign under the name of some other entity to achieve the exact same impact. So that was something, you know, that we all learned. And one thing I'll say here is it felt very important to start with negotiating directly with the counselors. So many organizers want to start with low level or high level confrontation. And as a Palestinian mother, my goal, I have allegiances to no one and no organization and no group. My goal is to get people to divest as fast as possible. And it really does speed things up if you get to know who your counselors know and you have them introduce you to them. They know of us organizers, they know our names, but they're going to be surprised, you know, to hear that their, you know, child's principal is introducing them to you. And these counselors are known people. Find out who knows them and have them introduce you to them. And just the other part of that, you know, starting with directly talking with counselors is this number here. So I got a lot of gray hairs in this campaign, encouraging organizers to not blow our cover, you know, with rallies, DA, you know, counselors drag their feet, you know, they make promises, you know, that they're not keeping. And it was important to maintain a little bit of patience and understand how the political process goes. You know, there are delays and stalls. So we managed to keep our campaign under wraps. You know, no one knew about it until it was put on the public agenda 3 days before the public hearing. And as soon as that happened, each of our counselors got 3,000 emails in the span of 12 hours. And the Zionist entity on this, you know, land here is well-resourced, well-connected. They will kill anything and everything they hear about. Our greatest asset is keeping things as quiet as possible and making sure that you have a win before you go for it. And so, like I said, friendly intros, and then make it easy and actionable for counselors. So we gave them, in all of our counselor meetings, we showed up with a brief, you know, explaining what BDS is, how it's legal or kind of legal, depending where you live. And we also gave them a draft resolution. You don't have to draft anything. Here's a resolution. It's in a format of you know, typical municipal language. And we also gave them a copy of a petition that we had also kind of under, the radar through networks, circulated. And in the case of Portland, when we met with each of those counselors, we said, here's, the brief, here's the resolution, and here's the 200 Portland businesses and organizations that want you to do this. What do we need to, or how can we support you to be brave? We weren't asking them to do this. We were asking them what they needed to be brave. I have copies of all of, these that I'll drop in the chat. So what is the time? How much time do I have left? When did I start?
I believe you've got about 5 more minutes if you
Okay.
want.
Thank you, Say. Choose your municipality wisely, just because you don't, I live a half an hour outside of Portland. Portland is, the biggest city in Maine, one of them. And they're movable. And so it's important to choose places that are movable, and the American Friends, AFSC, have helped me to understand that we launch BDS campaigns to win. We do not launch them to make noise and have everyone prove, that they're going to go nowhere. We are hurting the movement when we launch campaigns that don't go anywhere. And I've really had a hard time with organizers at times who are used to just like amplifying, escalating, making noise. I've asked them and encouraged them to do it on some other, advocate for ceasefire. But when it comes to BDS, we launch campaigns to win. And I've noticed that a lot of organizers need to team up with people who have that stamina and vision for winning. And everyone has a skill set here. And so I'll go on to the next slide because we talked about all of that. So I don't know how much all of us know about, how these processes work. I knew nothing, as I said, and I learned as I went, but you typically need a counselor to sponsor a resolution. So in all these meetings, you'll get a lot of, well, I'll vote yes if everyone else, votes yes. And so, but the resolution really can't go anywhere unless one or several counselors are willing to actually put their name on it and bring it. So we had about 4 meetings with counselors who said, it's an important issue. I want to say yes. If others vote yes, I'll vote yes. And so we didn't, we felt hopeful and encouraged, by that language, and always leaving that door open with counselors. And it's really important that, you find that one counselor who is willing to sponsor. And so we had conversations, with almost everyone, no real sponsor yet. And then we went back around and said, everyone seems to be wanting to do this. Are you willing to sponsor this? And so someone said yes. And that's how it got brought. And then some municipalities are going to want to negotiate your language, and that's okay. And so learning to compromise, we're in the belly of the beast here. I've been called like a Palestinian traitor, negotiating down language. We have to start somewhere. This is not about purity. This is part of being in a movement. And some of us who are going to want to hang on to certain language are really needed. And we also need some groups, to kind of just break through. And so, and then I'll end with, it just feels important to ensure that you've got a good press release drafted before the resolution night. It should go out the second it's voted. It's voted on. Either way, our groups want to control the narrative. And so drafting those press releases before the resolution night and having that person who can push send to all the journalists, that you can Google. You got this. Yes. So, DSA, we could not have done this without the networking and support of DSA and all of its organizers in Maine. And again, just passing on that wisdom from some of our organizers. At times, we have to play to our strengths and lead in ways that make sense. Yeah, I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Saleha. We really appreciate your time tonight. It's an honor to have you here. And yes, an amazing presentation. And I really think a lot of the things that you talked about are applicable in all different kinds of areas. Speaking personally, in my experience, having had some success with legislation in my area, a lot of these things about like bringing them written language already, having the press release ready to go, being willing to compromise on language, those kinds of things are absolutely true across the board in my experience as well. So yes, thanks again. And we're going to go ahead and go right into our next speaker now. We have Vish S. from Alameda, California, who is a campaign co-lead of East Bay DSA's Divest from Apartheid campaign that contributed to Alameda County divesting all of its holdings in Caterpillar and being a path to becoming the first U.S. county to adopt an ethical investment policy that would divest the jurisdiction from Israel's genocide. So go ahead and take it away, Vish. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, to Olivia for reaching out. I also want to just acknowledge Ed R., my campaign co-lead, my comrade who's been working on this campaign with us from the very beginning. Just point out, Saleha, I really appreciate what you did while we were in the middle of our campaign. I remember watching your city council consider and vote on the divestment effort. And it was, this has been a very long campaign. One thing that we've learned is that you have to be very patient, calculated. And when divestment wins elsewhere like that come up, it really is an inspiration, and it gives us the spark that we need to keep going. And I'll add that while each of these divestment wins on their own are a lot to celebrate, especially among the organizers and activists locally who worked on it, it's important to remember that the purpose of this is, like y'all did in Portland, to inspire further work like this, further campaigns, so that we can completely mainstream BDS and make it completely untenable for companies like Caterpillar and Chevron to continue doing business with the Zionist entity. And that is, the ultimate goal when it comes to BDS. So I have a slideshow that I would like to share as well too. Give me one moment, please. All right, actually, I need to share my screen. Is that right? Okay. Okay, can you all see the slides? Okay, great. All right, so we started our campaign roughly about a year ago to this day. In fact, next week we have our chapter annual convention where we will be hopefully recertifying this campaign. Last year we were elected the top priority campaign for our chapter, which means that a majority of the chapter resources and energy went into our campaign. Just a brief outline of the presentation. I want to talk about our Divest from Apartheid, or DFA, campaign trajectory. Focus on, so there's been 2 phases in our campaign. It wasn't what we contemplated to begin with. I think when we went into this, we knew a lot less about BDS. We knew a lot less about organizing through experience, through working with people such as Dove at the American Friends Service Committee. We now have a much more sharp understanding of what it takes to launch a successful and effective campaign. But in retrospect, this is how it turned out, that our campaign just was kind of parsed in 2 separate phases just by happenstance. So the first phase was that we did get that very visible win in terms of getting our county to divest all $32 million in Caterpillar bonds and claim a victory for the BDS movement. And following in wake of that, now we are still in the middle of the second phase of our campaign, which is to get an ethical investment policy passed at the county level, which would make us the first county in the United States to have such a policy. And we're quite hopeful that if we get the strong language that we are fighting for, it will serve as a model for jurisdictions going forward. And then we'll talk a little bit about what else we have in store, like what our future focus is for the campaign. So, of course, we are centered, our work is centered around pushing forward and supporting highlighting the BDS movement itself, which is, I think, to the last speaker mentioned, that when we do accomplish something, we want to make sure that we seize the narrative, and that we articulate our successes in a way that uplifts and pushes forward the BDS movement. All right. And the first phase of our campaign, which was to push for the divestment of Caterpillar, as the previous speaker, I think, spoke to, we were organizing very stealthily. We were trying not to grab the attention of very strong Zionist organizations that we have here locally in our county. I think at times this was really frustrating. In the grand scheme of things, less than a year to accomplish something like divesting from Caterpillar is really not a lot of time. But in the midst of an ongoing genocide, I think there were times when we were all really frustrated and we just wanted to kind of come out with it. And I think it takes a certain level of discipline, which comes with, organizing with people who are experienced in these kind of campaigns, that helps you maintain kind of a focus on getting the job done, which requires us to be quiet when that is most opportune for our campaigns. And now that the cat is out of the bag completely, this is great because we can be as vocal as we want. And this is a great opportunity for us to engage people in the community, educate more about what's going on in Palestine and the power of BDS, and grow ourselves as a socialist organization as well too. So just by way of background for folks who don't know about Caterpillar, it's this company that basically gets money from the Pentagon to produce D9 bulldozers, which are retrofitted by a subsidiary in Israel and used by the Israeli military they've been doing this for decades, just destroy the homes of Palestinians, to assault them, hurl rocks at them, and to trample and murder them as well too. So these are essentially, as Dove Baum from the AFSC says, they're essentially like tanks. When we started the campaign, one of the first things we were looking at is how feasible is the work that we want to do, the path ahead of us. And I think this is a really, really important part of the analysis for everybody to partake in. It's really important for you to think about what are the plus factors that you have, And we're all going to, depending on where we live, who we are, we're going to have different plus factors. And what are the minus factors? What are the obstacles that we can face? Because most of this work, in my mind, is developing a narrative. And when you have a good grasp of what are the plus factors in your favor, it helps you really develop that narrative in addition to figuring out your organizing strategy. So for us, I do recognize that, Dove says this all the time, that focusing on a company is not necessarily the way to do. We want to pass ethical investment policies wherever we go to make that the streamline. I do feel, though, that it is very helpful from an organizing standpoint when you have investments in a company that is as cartoonishly evil as Caterpillar to be able to spin that narrative. It is, in my opinion, a lot easier to activate, motivate people, draw them in, and then educate them when you can say, Caterpillar, we're invested in Caterpillar. They do all these awful things. They make people homeless while we have a homelessness epidemic here in Alameda County, than it is to talk about something a little more kind of broad and intangible, which is passing an ethical investment policy without something to point to. So yeah, we essentially based from the very beginning our campaign on we want to divest from Caterpillar. Another plus factor that we had going for us is that one of our so the governing body of a county in California is called the Board of Supervisors. So you have a city council for the city level, and then above that, a county is just a collection of different cities and unincorporated areas within that county, and the governing body is the Board of Supervisors. So we had, and in fact, my own supervisor was somebody who was, somewhat progressive. He had organized around divestment in terms of like apartheid in South Africa. 40 years ago, he had been on the Board of Supervisors when they passed a resolution divesting from the government of Burma in the 90s, and he was retiring as well too, which meant that in our mind, he was less susceptible to political pressures from Zionist groups, basically making his, another run for office less feasible, which unfortunately is what politicians think about all the time. And we were really able to play into, you've done all these great things in the past with respect to South Africa. Let's make this your legacy. Like this is the last big thing that you retire on. And I think that helped us a lot. Going on that, in the Bay Area, we have a rich history of divestment. Again, we divested from South Africa at the county level, as well as from Burma in the 90s. And then historically, Hayward is a city within Alameda County, and as I think Olivia mentioned, Hayward, Hayward was the first city in the U.S. to divest and support a BDS. Richmond, California, while it is not within Alameda County, it is just one city north. It's outside of our county boundaries within Contra Costa County. It is considered within the East Bay. They divested. And then later, the city of Alameda, not to be confused with the county, the city of Alameda divested from weapons manufacturers and fossil fuel companies. So not from, like the BDS type of companies, but still there was a divestment movement. And so there was a grassroots movement of engaged individuals and groups that could join our county level or organizing as well too. Another thing was Dove Baum lives in Alameda County, which was a great asset. So a lot of you have spoken with Dove as an advisor. We got the added benefit of having her like come and sit in on our meetings with us because like this is her home as well too. And we worked a lot with the council member of Hayward, who was instrumental in passing their divestment measures. And then finally, I'll say that we have a very active regional union movement in support of Palestine. We have a Bay Area Labor for Palestine here. And as I think one of the previous speakers mentioned, and I'll get to in coming slides when we talk about the coalitions that we built, we really engaged with the largest union that was representing municipal county level workers, SEIU 1021. So we had county workers calling on their employer to divest. And I think as that was previously mentioned, that was very, very powerful and very, very helpful for us. Again, despite all these like positive things we had going for us, we still had a relatively conservative BOS, Board of Supervisors. Besides that one supervisor I mentioned, who we didn't even know if he would support us, we had no confidence in anybody else. And our county treasurer had gone on a JCRC sponsored trip to Israel. So this is significant because in California, which we learned later on, it is the treasurer, the county or municipal entities can delegate the authority to invest and therefore divest to the treasurer, which almost all counties and cities do in California. And in this case, the treasurer, the person who had the power to divest, was somebody who we suspected was a liberal Zionist, which it pleasantly turns out that he was more cooperative than we suspected, but still, this was something that we had to consider. And then just really quickly, again, this is kind of going into the history of divestment historically in Alameda County and more recently. So in addition to the cities in the area that divested, again, like SEIU 1021, the largest public sector union, adopted a resolution internally divesting themselves, which was one of the most helpful things to our campaign because we had a great group of unionist organizers that we were able to actively organize with. We had the Berkeley Teachers Union as well too, which is leading the CalSTRS Divest campaign that also divested. And these are all great wins that goes into the narrative. Okay, so initial steps that we took. One, again, we did look at investment reports and our investment policy just to see if there was anything in there that would be helpful. If you don't find any offensive investments, again, still like go ahead and launch your campaign. But for us, for building that narrative and leveraging that for our organizing purposes and drawing people in, that was really helpful for us. And we used a lot of Public Records Act requests for stuff that we didn't have access to that was not posted online publicly. It was really important for us to understand who had the decision-making authority in terms of who had the ability to invest and divest and who had the power and authority to pass an ethical investment policy. And so we had to do a little bit of research on looking at the county municipal code and California government codes, et cetera, et cetera. Also really important was to understand how the Board of Supervisors itself operates, like what rules govern agendizing, bringing something before the board for a vote, what kind of obstructionism can individual supervisors engage in. So we got that information early through a SEPA request. Another thing we did is we requested all the resolutions related to South Africa divestment and Brno divestment. And I can't tell you how important that was to making a compelling case to our treasurer that, look, your predecessor has done these like the same things that we're talking about in the past, and I will give you the document for you to see yourself that this is a lot easier and a lot less scary than you think it is because it's been done in the past. And then, just understanding how your county or your city holds itself, what its vision is, and really latching on to that. So we have a vision to eliminate homelessness here by the year 2036 in Alameda County. But how are you going to do that if you're okay with sending all this money to Israel to basically make other people homeless? Another thing we did, really important, is we power mapped. It's really important to understand where the sources of opposition are coming, how much influence the different organizations that will oppose what you're doing have on the decision makers, and also who your allies are and who support you can really leverage. At the end of the day, it turned out that SEIU 1021, pursuant to our power mapping, that large county union that we told you, had the most power over several of the decision makers. They contributed $20,000 or more, which is in election cycles, which is quite a bit of money for a county supervisor race. And so we worked with them extensively. And then really hyping the campaign. Like we found spaces where we would regularly talk about the work that we wanted to do, the vision we had from the very beginning. Bay Area Labor for Palestine was a space that I belonged to, and I would constantly go there and just try to center this work to the point where people became very familiar with it and started engaging and contributing to the campaigning. So what do we do at the, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. How am I doing on time? I can speed it up if you'd like me to.
You're a little over, but that's okay. You could just go ahead and finish up. You're good.
Okay, I'll rush through this then. So like, how do we do our organizing? So one thing we did from the very beginning is we had this in partnership with other organizations, including a coalition that Ed and I actually started called, or a collective of activists called Bay Area Divest, started this petition. We circulated it around the Bay Area, and it basically asked people to consent or to agree with this statement that we have here. Public funds should not be invested in any institution or corporation involved in supporting and or enabling Israeli apartheid, occupation, or genocide. The purpose of this was threefold. One, to gain visibility for the campaign. Two, to build a list of people that we could make further asks on in the future. And three, ultimately to actually produce this list of what came out to about 2,000 individuals that signed on to the supervisors before they were going to vote on what we were asking them to vote on. Second thing is we engaged in extensive political education. This is actually a FAQ document that we came up with early in the campaign. We can share the link. Really encourage your own campaign to develop something like this. You could use ours, but it really helps your organizers understand what you're doing and how to talk about the issue. And finally, we organized around an organizational sign-on letter. This was another way to allow to get the word out about what we were doing, make organizational partners, tons of unions, faith communities, community. I can't stress how important it is to work with the faith community. That is kind of the hardest community for some of these politicians to kind of push back against. And so that, again, like the petition, helped us grow a network of individuals that we continue to collaborate with throughout the process. But also, like, we produced the letter to the supervisors with 90 organizations and 30 faith and community leaders to sign on, and that was pretty helpful. One super another thing that we did that was really incredible, I can't tell you how helpful this was. I mean, it was a little bit historic in its own right, is that a bunch of DSA, East Bay DSA members organized around passing dual resolutions within our Labor Council, one in support of an arms embargo, and two in support of local divestment organizing. And again, that was a good way to educate, get people involved from the labor community, but also it then allowed us to, one, send a letter from our Labor Council executive secretary treasurer to many of these supervisors, and two, personally be a part of meetings with these supervisors when we wanted to get their votes. And he actually was very instrumental to flipping one person who we expected to oppose what we were doing to supporting it. So yeah, that was really great organizing from DSA. And then just in terms of escalating in phase one, we did a lot of action network, email campaign, consistent meetings with our treasurer, who we again suspected was a liberal Zionist, was very scared, very hesitant to partner with us in this work, and with constant meetings, which included people he was comfortable with, including that Hayward's council member. That's important. Find people that these folks are comfortable with and include them in your meetings. And Dove, who is Israeli herself too. So there was a lot of relatability on different fronts. We were able to get him comfortable with dumping Caterpillar by the time we wanted to. And again, pulling labor allies into our meetings. And so that ultimately culminated on December 10th, 2024, Treasurer at a supervisors meeting announcing that he had dumped all $32 million or was in the process of Caterpillar bonds, and the Board of Supervisors unanimously voting to instruct him to develop an ethical investment policy. So that is where we are, phase two right now. We just passed a monumental hurdle, which is we got this out of committee. We got a pretty strong ethical investment policy drafted through months and months and months of engagement with the treasurer, where my comrade Ed, who hopefully is still on the call, actually helped get 90 people on a call with Treasurer Levy. And after all of this engagement, we were able to get him to produce something that we can be proud about. We're still going to push further, but we are at a point where we now have Kufi that has entered the fray, and JCRC. So we got a lot of Zionists that are afraid of the work that we're doing, and we just have to keep up the organizing. And then the final thing I'll say is that like what we want to do in the future is seal the win with Alameda County, both in terms of getting that ethical investment policy and then controlling the narrative and doing mass publicity around this in support of the furtherance of BDS. Two is supporting and encouraging local campaigns, which Ed has been instrumental in being the brainchild behind. We have 2 local campaigns within the counties, Dublin and Union City, and hopefully we will get some sort of divestment accomplishment with them in the future. And then finally, we're thinking about salting new campaigns. We're considering supporting our own and salting new campaigns. So ASERA is the county retirement system, which is an order of magnitude more invested that we could work with the treasurer on divesting. And the final thing I'll say is that what we're trying to do is identify counties and cities where they have particular investments that are nearing maturity and reaching out to organizers in those jurisdictions and asking for their interest in launching their own divestment campaigns. And so again, like I do recognize that ultimately, like we don't care about playing whack-a-mole with individual investments. We want the investment policy, but it is so much easier, one, to convince folks to work on a campaign like this when they realize that like something is about to mature and it could be an easier campaign for them to launch. And in terms of like actually winning a campaign like that and using that as a gateway to passing an ethical investment policy, when a city or a county's choice is between not renewing a bond or selling it off earlier, not renewing a bond is a lot easier to win a campaign like that. So sorry for running over. Thank you for your time. And yeah, free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Vish. That was also an incredible presentation. And I think the thoroughness, the great organization, the planning that you've done there, that everybody in your chapter is doing, kind of attests to the gravity of what we're up against and how Zionism is so entrenched in our political systems and all the work that needs to be done to root it out. So thanks again to both of you for presenting tonight. And we are running a little over time, so we're going to go into the Q&A session here, but we're going to try to keep things just a little bit short. It looks like Saleha has been answering some of the questions in the Q&A box, but I am going to go ahead and read some of these out because I think some of them are really great questions. Saleha, feel free to read your answers out, or Vish, if you want to respond to any of these questions as well. You should be able to see them in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of these out and post them in the chat just in case people can't see. And give me 1 second here. Okay. So what are effective talking points for moving people with liberal politics into divestment campaigns? How can the cannot be anti-fascist with being anti-genocide be elaborated into an effective talking point?
I can
Delayed.
jump in here.
Okay, go ahead.
Just, I think bringing it back to free speech, and, seeing what is happening to Mahmoud Khalil and all of these other university students who are being detained. We told you that they weren't going to stop at anti-BDS laws. We've been saying this for years, and now they're making it illegal to divest from fossil fuels. They're going after DEI, if you think they're stopping at Palestine, you're wrong. Palestine is the blueprint, and all of our free. Also, I know that like divest has been a popular framework for a lot of organizers. So we don't have air conditioning in our schools. Our teachers are paying out of pocket to be able to have supplies for their classrooms, and yet we have billions of dollars going to Israel. Just framing it as think about all the things that we could have instead of spending billions of dollars on weapons for Israel. I think, polls show that the majority of Americans, of all political parties are with us on that. So it's just a matter of bringing that as official policy.
Yes, totally agree. The only thing I'll add is it has never been more popular to be for Palestinian liberation. And the media is actually helping, the movement right now, like as awful as it is. If you've been tracking this occupation for 77 years as of Thursday, or this, I wouldn't be afraid to just appeal to people's humanity. Everyone is seeing what is happening, and they're either turning their heads or they're doing something about it. And so we really didn't want to be in the business of convincing politicians to do the right thing. As a Palestinian, I have been trying to do that my entire life. And it's really about appealing to people's humanity and then proving that their constituents want them to end our local complicity in the horrors. And so just like depoliticizing this as much as you can. This is about children and human beings starving and being murdered every day with our tax dollars. And that is the power of divestment. Each individual in a municipality can make a choice about where their tax dollars go. And that was one of the most convincing arguments for locals and businesses to sign on. And we just pushed it over to the counselors and said, what are you going to do about this?
Thank you, Saleha. Looks like we've got a question here that Vish wants to answer. The question from Sean is, what were the steps that went into getting organizational endorsements?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add to the last question as well too. I think one thing that was helpful for us is taking a more bird's eye view as well too. And so we tried to organize around fossil fuel divestments and divestment from immigration, detention facilities, et cetera too. And I think that creates a kind of larger coalition, which some of the more liberal types can tap into, and you can use that as a base to educate people as to why, like, you can't be for environmental justice and not care about a free Palestine as well too. Um, as to, yeah, what were the steps into getting organizational endorsements? I mean, that's really a matter for us of um, just kind of doing the work and like first starting out with, okay, everybody you're organizing with, who do they know? Like, what is your networks? Like, everybody knows somebody, I guess, in this space who's a part of JVP. We may know somebody who's part of PYM, and just reaching out and asking for some time and letting them know what we're doing, and then just kind of growing it from there. I think once you get like for us, once we had that first endorsement, it made it a lot easier to get the rest. Like, I got an endorsement from my own union. So even though my union is not like regionally based, it's amalgamated, that made it so much easier for us to get other unions to like step up and take interest in what we were doing when they saw like there was a legitimate labor union that was supporting our work. So yeah, it's just like leveraging connections we all have.
Thank you. And it looks like Saleha has dropped some more resources in the chat, so thank you for that. Okay, another one for us here. So when negotiating with council members in the early stages of the campaign, should we be targeting the stronger allies to the questionable allies to opponents? How do you leverage the ally council members to move the questionable allies?
I dropped an answer in there, and just to kind of summarize it, we preferred to do the negotiating with counselors ourselves. And so, and we found that counselors appreciated that, you know, their own relationships are complex at times. So Belfast also divested, Belfast, Maine, 3 months after Portland. And this is an encouraging story, I think. The mayor's son had been expelled from Harvard for political protest and encampments. And so all we had to do was show him the, you know, the brief, the resolution, the petition, and we got a little nervous because we didn't hear a lot from him, and he had, you know, done all the negotiating on his own. And you know, it went to a vote. We had like no notice, and that was kind of an atypical campaign here. We prefer to depoliticize, you know, this, be the messengers as Palestinians, JVP members, having credible messengers leading this campaign and being the face of it to counselors, I think is part of, you know, why all of our campaign is went somewhere.
Thank you, Saleha. Vish, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, all I'll say is that, like, in California, we have a law called the Brown Act. It prohibits politicians on the same public entity from really engaging with each other outside of a public forum. So it's supposed to be for transparency's sake, which really meant that, like, we kind of had to do the work ourselves of engaging with each of these folks. And so we did start with kind of the strongest person, and we use those meetings as an opportunity to kind of pick their brain as to, like, who we should be working with next, who might be people who can, like, leverage power on them as well too. So yeah.
Thank you. And I really want to be respectful of people's time. I know it's very late on the East Coast, so we're just going to do one more question here, as long as that's okay with everybody. Okay, so let me just pick a good one. Let's see here. For newer organizers, are there any tips for how to go about finding legitimate sources showing investments in Zionist entity? In the Zionist entity is what I assume they meant.
So I see Sohail answered this one in the chat on, you know, what they did. They didn't know the information before they started, and that didn't matter. Also, most US cities have an investment policy that is adopted annually, and they have to disclose their investments every year, and it is publicly available in most cases. So if you can't find it on the website, you might be able to just email someone at the city and ask for it. It might not even have to be like a FOIA request officially. But check your city's website and see if it's online, because for a lot of cities, their investments are publicly available, their annual investment statement. Also, I want to recommend AFSC as a resource. They have a database called Investigate, where you can look up specific holdings and see you know, what they're invested in. And they also have company profiles, and they have office hours, BDS office hours twice a week, where if you're working on a BDS campaign, you can just come ask questions. AFSC, they are the divestment experts, and they will help you. And I will share the link to find those office hours as well.
Okay, it looks like Ed from the chat wants to chime in here as well. And I know that they were organizing with Vish, so I'll go ahead and allow them to speak here as well.
I just wanted to coattail off of the last comment on, like, these investment policy reviews that happens every year. I actually didn't know that that happened outside of California cities, but for both Dublin and Union City, that was really instrumental in organizing around that date, right? Like setting it on a timeline and just working towards it, and like kind of making it like almost like a drop dead date. Like, okay, whatever happens, we're gonna mobilize on this day and make a show like for BDS. That's all. Just one thought.
Thank you, Ed. And Vish, I saw you had your hand raised. Did you want to end on a comment here?
Yeah, really quickly. So I just wanted to like stress, like, I think it's pretty important to search out at least the investment policy. That is obviously separate from the investment report. Because oftentimes you'll be surprised like what it says in your county or city's investment policy. We found investment policies for potential targets where there's already like a prohibition on investing in fossil fuel companies, weapons manufacturers, right? And so this is all information that's really good to know again in building a narrative when you target the elected officials or the people that you're trying to organize. And in the case of CalSTRS divest, so CalSTRS is the teachers retirement pension fund here in California. It's the second largest investment pool in the United States. And actually, quite interestingly, like the strategy they've taken is to argue that divesting from companies such as Elbit Systems and Caterpillar actually is compatible with their current investment policy. So you can find a lot of like interesting stuff to work with within your investment policy.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Vish. Really appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and close out. I'm just going to share my screen one last time here for just this final slide here. It's not too big. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to both Vish and Saleha for coming tonight, and to Olivia and Rachel for co-organizing this session with me. All the information here tonight is incredibly important, and we did record this. So once that recording goes live, we will have that available as a resource in the International Committee, and that can be shared with chapters in any comrades, any organizations that we think could benefit from that. So thank you to everyone for joining. If you're not a DSA member, you can join at dsausa.org/join and start taking part in a BDS campaign similar to the ones that were talked about tonight, or start your own. And I just want to plug that we do have a second session coming up, and I believe a little over a month now. So save the date for that, where we will talk about 5 Vermont cities that successfully voted to become apartheid-free cities, which is an amazing success. So yeah, and I think that's all we've got for everybody tonight. So thanks to everybody for coming. I really appreciate it, and have a great night, everybody.